We're going to continue our conversation about How to Save the West, Ancient Wisdom for 5 Modern Crises by Spencer Klavan. No relation. You left out the no relation on that.
Oh, it's in the inside joke.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah. as long as it's there, yeah.
There's a land acknowledgement and then a disclaimer.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And we want to talk about video games. There's a reason they called Play-Doh Play.
Play-Doh. And it wasn't actually that he liked clay, that he little colored clay.
Little colored clay.
Yeah, right.
So you and I played video games the entire time you were growing up, and
That's right.
And had wonderful times and all this. And now, every time we say how good they are, and the fact, I've had like childhood experts say, no, they're terrible, terrible things, because if you play video games for 8 hours in a row, and I'll say, well, if you play video games for 8 hours in a row, you have no father. That may be a problem. So what can the ancients teach us about?
Yeah. Well, this is another great example of something that I think if we only engage with this at the level of its newness, because video games, obviously we were joking, there were no video games in the time of ancient Greece, like newsflash to anybody that needs to know this. So on the one hand, there's something very new, but I think we really miss out and we have the wrong kinds of conversations because we don't know the right kinds of questions to ask if we only talk about it in terms of the new, because there are some very important ancient ideas that need application here. You and I are both defenders of video games in the public square. We've argued that they are art, that they are high art in many cases, that they have artistic potential at least. And yeah, I get the same thing a lot. It's interesting when people react. You say video games can be art, and people say video games are bad for you. And it's really interesting that that's the response, because I actually didn't say they were good for you. One of the things that Plato argues very forcefully, and we were talking about this earlier in the show, is that just because something is art doesn't actually mean that it's good for you, right? Now, there is a good role for art in the human life, and that is to open up the moral imagination, right? That is to make contact with states of ethical existence that you don't necessarily have direct access to. And, you can do so, as Aristotle points out, in a kind of safe way. This is his idea of catharsis, purification, the way that you... So all of that is to the good. But we know, if we think about it, that going to the opera for 8 hours straight would actually have all sorts of problems.
Yeah.
And in fact, when opera was the hot new art form, people said exactly this. They said people are getting too obsessed. There are monarchs who are dissolving their life into this imaginary world, right? And isn't this just a kind of distraction from the important stuff of life? And I think the answer here is, of course, if you just apply absolutely no discipline to your relationship to video games, they will deform and distort you in all of these ways. And the reason they will do that is because they have so much artistic power. Because you wouldn't, if something, I don't know, if you found a drug, let's say caffeine, that makes you alert, you would drink a cup of it, but you wouldn't chug it or hook yourself up to an IV drip, right? Yeah. Precisely because of what's good about it, because it has this power to do something good for you, which is wake you up and make you alert. Video games, being art, are the same way. They have an important role to play. They have a job to do, and that is to show us the world as more than meat, to show that the world has moral qualities, has aesthetic properties, can be beautiful, that evil is evil and needs fighting. I mean, all of these truths are very alive in video games in a way that they haven't been in our fine arts in this country for some time. And I think conservatives should care about that and should want to understand that the reason these things are dangerous is not because they're bad, but because they're so good that we need to be very careful about the way that we interact with them.
Right. That was Plato's point, right? That music touches you so deeply.
So deeply, right. That it's a funnel. He called it a funnel that you pour tunes into your very soul. And if you do that too much, then you basically dissolve the boundaries that keep you from just freaking out all the time.
Right.
Which is there's a good argument to be made that that's a lot of what we're seeing now. We were talking about the Grammys. We were talking about the fact that people have music everywhere. I mean, we don't even notice that we're already in a position like the guy in the basement playing video games all the time, but with music, right? Yes. Music is everywhere all the time.
Always.
And maybe this, is contributing to our sort of high emotional level of discourse. And so, yeah, Plato, as we were kind of joking about, like, Plato takes an extreme position on this in the Republic. But he does that because he's forcing you to reckon with the fact that this stuff is never morally neutral. And I think we get confused in the culture wars a lot. When we talk about the culture wars, we imagine, this is something I argue very extensively in the book, we imagine that this is a fight between the right, which is just scolding people and wants to impose moral strictures onto art, and the left, which thinks, let a thousand flowers bloom, everything is possible. They're libertines, basically. That might have been true at a certain point in our history. It's obviously not true now, because if you listen to the way the left talks about art, they actually are very moralistic about it. They just have a totally different set of morals from our morals. You see, we need more Black, trans, female representation. What we need, that's an ethical claim, right? And it's a claim about how you ought to see the world. You ought to see certain kinds of races as inherently laudable. You ought to see certain forms of sexuality as acceptable. And art needs to be a moral tool. That's how they want to use it, you know? And so we're actually in a fight over whose morals are going to be represented in art. And that's why conservatives, again, shouldn't be understanding themselves as like the kind of scolders who are trying to hold back this tide. We're actually the truth tellers who are trying to depict the world as it actually is, rather than this kind of cockamamie neo-utopia that they're trying to force down our throats.
You know, when I lived in England, there was a horrifying murder, and the murderers were on trial, and out of nowhere, the judge said, I believe that what they called video nasties there, which were just horror movie, violent movies.
Yeah.
Had something to do with this. They had no reason to say it, and it came out and it became a huge deal, and they canceled the opening of Chucky 4 or something like that. All kinds of...
Probably a social good, all things
but there was one movie that they canceled that was actually pretty good, The Good Son, I think it was called. And I wrote this long articles, defending violence in fiction. As I've grown older, it's not that I wouldn't defend it in places. Homer is certainly very violent. But there are things that I won't let into my head anymore. I just don't want them there. You know? Is that too clunky to think that a guy watches a violent movie and he goes out and becomes violent, or is there something to that? Besides, let's put psychopaths out of it for a minute. They're just ordinary people.
No, I don't think it's clunky at all. I actually think that's one of the ancient dangers of art, right? And that's one reason why material gets called sensitive. It's sensitive material, right? When you depict things that are dark and difficult and painful, it's not that you should never depict those things. It's that you should handle with care. And this is, there was a whole debate about Lolita, which is a book, depicting basically child molestation, and there was a point at which the author Vladimir Nabokov said, art purely exists to afford me aesthetic bliss. There's no other moral dimension to it. And what the ancients would have said, what Plato and Aristotle as well would have said, although Aristotle was more moderate, is no, because art is a mimesis, and because you have a mimesis, because this is about representation, and because we are imitative animals, what the artist does is he kind of encapsulates like a little vial of the inner world, of the inner life, and he puts that before you, and then you encounter that, and you take it into yourself. And so, at its best, art is a way to do that diffuses the violence of certain emotions, right? If you go to a Greek tragedy, you go to Shakespeare, you talk about somebody that puts gore in front of you, puts nihilism on stage, right? But he does so in such a way that shows you the truth of it, right? Macbeth, right, commits murder, and even when he still thinks he's getting away with it, it warps and distorts his psyche so deeply that by the time he is caught out, he's already in hell, right? Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in its petty pace from day. That's a man who has been hollowed out from the inside. And to see that and to see it depicted as it is to take that into yourself in a very different way, right? To understand that, if you too go down this route, somebody can say to you, thou shalt not kill. But there come times when you really want something, or that you really want to bend the arc of the moral universe, and then you need inside you that feeling that you had when you saw what happened to Macbeth, right? You took it inside yourself. So again, it's like, is there a bad version of this where you see, violence just purely glorified. You play Grand Theft Auto, and then you have kind of this, your aggression aggravated. Of course there is.
Yeah.
But the reason that that's bad, every bad thing is the perversion of a good thing, right?
Yeah.
The reason it's bad is because this power is actually very important to
I
us.
remember you and I playing a game. It may have been Grand Theft Auto, and we turned it off. We said, we don't want to be that character. And that was like...
I think it was God of War, actually.
It was God of War.
Which is a game we love generally,
Yeah,
but it had
yeah.
a moment in it where they just
I
really...
remember that. Yes,
Yeah.
I've talked about that. All right, we got to stop. It's How to Save the West: Ancient Wisdom for 5 Modern Crises. It's a great book. You do not want to miss the book, and it really does talk about a lot of the things we've been talking about. For more great content, like and subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.